Hey everyone, BioFan here. The Trespasser DLC for Dragon Age Inquisition is the final piece of content for the third installment in the series. For $14.99, you can begin the DLC via the war table in the post-game after defeating Corypheus. Trespasser takes place in 944 Dragon, 2 years after the end of the main game of Inquisition. You'll reconnect with followers, combat a Qunari threat, and decide the fate of the organization you've built. I will keep all major story spoilers out of this review, while still covering all the content in depth. In Trespasser, you'll go back and forth between the main quest, events taking place in the Winter Palace, and interacting with your followers. The story itself is much more linear than the main game, which I very much enjoyed. The opening of the DLC sets the stage for the future timeframe. You're eased into the transition well, with an added bit of nostalgia as an old ally greets you and you converse about the last 2 years. Your companions are present very early on, and your advisors are there right from the beginning. While the story is more focused on your followers than minor characters, there are lots of minor cameos, sometimes mentions, and sometimes appearances. There are a ton of cutscenes, but they are also accompanied by long, boring loading screens. And the audio sometimes cuts in a little too early or a little too late, aside from one occasion where it might actually be deliberate. You'll learn a whole lot about the Elven Pantheon of Gods, a great deal of which comes from codexes. Pretty much all of the codexes are very important to the DLC, so be sure to read them as you go. The Inquisitor and party briefly mentioned some bits of them, but I feel the DLC is maybe a little too dependent on the codexes in order to have the full experience. I think a better way to show the new lore, versus having it too dependent on reading codexes, could have been a flashback vision, like what we experienced in the Fade, or maybe even just audio recordings, like what we see with the Mordin's past in Jaws of Hakon. Players who don't typically read codexes could easily miss out on a large part of the experience. There are references to past events in the series, as well as several past events and choices in the main game. Several of your past choices have consequences, some of which, especially those related to your followers, may come back to bite you in the butt. The main focus of the plot is on the Qunari. I would have liked a little bit more interaction with the political representatives, as there was a good deal of build-up to the main trial scene, and I felt it was a little too short. One huge difference in this DLC versus all the rest of the DLCs for Dragon Age Inquisition is that side quests are practically non-existent. There's a few loot-oriented diversions, but they're very short, so the vast majority of the DLC is focused on the main plot. Trespasser felt considerably longer than the other DLCs, even if it was just by an hour or so. In total, most of my playthroughs were about 4 to 5 hours long, possibly longer. This is the first epilogue DLC BioWare has ever done. While the Citadel DLC for Mass Effect 3 served as an epilogue for many players, the events technically took place in the middle of the game. While this was their first time doing something like this, I felt BioWare hit the nail right on the head. The DLC introduced a bunch of new features and combat elements. One of the best additions to the DLC was the dream of a crafting shop. Herbs, metals, leathers, cloths, rune ingredients, almost any crafting material you could ever desire. Also note that the crafting materials are all reasonably priced. This isn't the obscene markup like in the Black Emporium. The only thing missing from the crafting shop was Veil Quartz, but you can loot some off a dead Qunari at one point in the DLC. To go along with the best crafting shop in Thedas are fully decked out crafting facilities from the gods right next door. Weapon crafting, armor tinting, potion upgrading station, everything is there. This DLC is a crafter's paradise. I think the only way it could have been any better would have been to have Fade-touched materials available for purchase. Patch 10 for Dragon Age Inquisition introduced the wardrobe and the golden Nug statue. The wardrobe allows players to change their casual outfit, And the Golden Nug allows players to sync collectibles, such as schematics, potion recipes, mounts, etc., across all playthroughs. Both of these, and the storage chest, can be found on the Winter Palace grounds. There were a few slight tweaks to the ability trees in Trespasser. The upgrades to many abilities now have 2 options. Some of them were not that great, but some were also pretty useful. I felt some were better suited for the player rather than the companion combat AI, or vice versa. Also, it really just depends on your combat playstyle. You can purchase a Tactician's Renewal from the crafting shop if you'd like to make any changes to your abilities. While the new armor looks cool on some race gender combos, mainly humans, it looks positively dreadful or downright hilarious on others. It has a more magey look and doesn't really suit rogues or warriors. There are now enchantments for armor called sigils. You have to sacrifice one stat to gain something else. For all sigils, I felt the cost of using them was too high, with not enough gained. With all these new features, it seems like BioWare may be playing around with elements they're considering adding into future games. I quite like the wardrobe, and it finally got rid of those boring beige pajamas. And the Golden Nug made additional playthroughs much easier by increasing my selection pool of schematics. Having different options for upgrading abilities was nice, but some of the new additions weren't all that great. The sigils were a good idea in theory, but I didn't like having to sacrifice something to gain something else. Mordin the Bard just happens to be at the Winter Palace, and she has a collection of beautiful new bard songs for you to enjoy. There are various ways for you to up your stats at the Winter Palace. Collecting dog treats ups your constitution, while fixing crooked paintings increases your strength. The Inquisitor gains a powerful new ability, Anchor Discharge, which is added to a new separate spot in your ability triggers. On Xbox One controls, it took a minute or two to get used to, but afterward felt easy to use. As the Inquisitor's hand malfunctions, it progresses through a dangerous evolution of sorts. You can light a dark room, make your party immune to damage for a short time, and eventually damage nearby enemies. Anchor Discharge recharges over a short amount of time, and later is fueled by focus. Combat is more challenging than the main game of Inquisition, probably up to par with the Descent DLC, being that enemies will scale all the way up to the level cap at 27. Qunari are fierce adversaries, and other enemies are just as tough, if not more challenging. While combat was enjoyable, there was no real reward for defeating enemies, especially for players who had already hit the level cap at 27. The Qunari don't really drop loot, but that's not too bad considering you don't really need too many things by this point. Since this is an epilogue, you wouldn't be able to use anything you picked up for very long anyway. You can start the DLC after defeating Corypheus at somewhere in the mid-upper teen levels, but I wouldn't recommend starting Trespasser until you've reached the mid-20s, as more combat abilities and buffs are useful in the challenging combat. The final boss wasn't too interesting, and was poorly established as a villain. There needed to be a lot more build-up than a codex entry and a few minor appearances for such a climactic DLC. The combat itself had some interesting effects, but it seemed more like you were just waiting it out because the health bar was very high. Overall, it was not very memorable in context of the series, or even Inquisition itself. Here are a few tips to help you as you play the DLC. If you've already played Trespasser and don't intend on replaying it anytime soon, then feel free to click on the screen and skip this section. Don't bother crafting your best weapons and armor until you start the DLC. You'll have access to the crafting area and materials shop before any combat takes place, and you can purchase any materials you may want to use for the weapons and armor. Be sure to use the Golden Nug to get all the schematics you picked up across all your playthroughs. At least 80 to 90% of the enemies you face will be Qunari. They are susceptible to electricity damage and are alive, so corruption runes would help tremendously. The Qunari have a lot of sneaky rogues who just love to attack you from behind, so guard is very important. You'll be surrounded more times than not, so mass area affecting abilities are great. Don't be afraid to spend up all your remaining money. You're not going to be able to use it later, so go crazy. You want to buy a 10,000 elf fruit? You go right on ahead, you crazy kids. You'll start out in the red diplomatic outfit, but can change it pretty early on. I recommend changing your outfit immediately so you can look all prettyful in the companion cutscenes. I would recommend at least playing the Descent for powerful weapon schematics and gold you can use to buy lots of crafting materials. Unless they're dead or hate you with a burning passion, most characters return to join you at the Winter Palace. Your relationships with them and choices you made in their personal quests are often represented. They've all been living separate lives in the last 2 years, and you'll get to learn all about what they've been up to. Blackwall, for example, will now go by Tom Rainier. Your choice of Divine is heavily shown throughout the DLC. Just because Victoria has a new job and title doesn't mean she won't assist the Inquisitor in the DLC. Cassandra and Vivian can come with you and participate in combat, while Liliana resumes her duties as Inquisition Spy Master for the time being. Cassandra and Vivian get some sweet new armor if made Divine. However, it's exclusive to only the Divine, and I'm very jealous. There are specific points where you can trigger party banter. While party banter issues were mostly fixed in patch 10, this was likely a way for them to test out an alternative solution. I quite liked it as a means to hear party banter often, but know that your companions may also pipe up at other times. I personally noticed that Varric, Vivian, and Iron Bull had quite a lot to say as you progressed through the story. The companion interactions at the Winter Palace are absolutely wonderful. Each follower gets a cutscene or two, and romances get extra content and scenes, some of which made me personally squeak to the point where I sounded like a pterodactyl. A few of the scenes with the companions are extremely humorous as well. Relationships between your companions are touched upon, several of which change as characters mature and develop. This is shown through companion conversation and in party banter. For example, Cassandra as Divine becomes much less bothered by Sarah's behavior. There's a good amount of content with your advisors to balance with the companion content. Your romance with either Colin or Josephine is most definitely included. There was little content for a negative relationship with followers. While it makes sense for some of them not to return if they hate your guts, some are there regardless, and don't really have much content for disliking the Inquisitor. Unfortunately, beloved minor characters, such as Harding and Krem, get little screen time and minimal closure content with the Inquisitor. The voice acting, especially for the protagonists, was exceptionally well done. The emotional dialogue in the DLC really allowed the talent of the voice actors to shine. For most of the adventure, you'll be traveling through Illuvians. The Illuvians provide a unique way for us to travel through a cornucopia of new environments, and they also have awesome animations. You'll get to see new areas of the Winter Palace, which is much more beautiful in the daytime. A flowing water wall, bathhouse spa, golden lions, this is truly Orlesian architecture at its best. Other environments include gorgeous green hills, dark caves with water elements, sections of the crossroads, and various elven ruins. A gorgeous and realistic water flowing effect is seen in a few places, and looks awesome running downstairs. A large portion of the DLC takes place in the Crossroads. The Crossroads area is breathtaking and holds several hidden treasures. In accordance with the lore, elves see the Crossroads as vibrant and full of color, whereas other races see it as drab and lifeless. Non-elven Inquisitors will also express minor exhaustion when crossing between Illuvians. The appearance of the Crossroads near Illuvians forms to look similar to the area the mirror leads, but this is also more expressed for Elven Inquisitors. All of the environments, especially the Crossroads, have cool interactive elements, though my favorite and one of the funnest combat elements of the DLC was making Gutlock go boom. You'll get many answers from Solus, but not all of them. His story is not over by any means, but you do get several pieces to the puzzle, so to speak. There are a variety of different tones that can be expressed in the Inquisitor's dialogue with Solus. The voice acting for the protagonist is so emotionally well expressed in this scene, it gave me goosebumps. Your relationship with Solus, whether friend, foe, or romance, determines parts of his dialogue. If you romance Solus, you'll get some closure to your relationship in a very emotional scene. Your companions are not in the scene with Solus, which I felt was okay, because it gave sort of an epic final showdown type feeling to the scene. There are two main choices for the fate of the Inquisition, with 3 different tones for each choice, and further variations on top of that. There is an epilogue slide sequence similar to the ending of the main game, but it was not voiced and the text transitions go a little bit too fast. Followers have their own paths going forward. Sometimes it even includes you. All of your followers end up in future situations perfectly befitting them and the choices you've made in their storylines. There is a scene after the epilogue slides that you should pay particular attention to, as it hints at things that may be relevant for future installments in the series. During the credit roll, there is some hilarious dialogue from Cassandra that is something you definitely don't want to miss. Let's finish up with a summary of everything discussed. There are a whole lot of cutscenes, which is something many fans requested more of, but there were a lot of long black loading screens to go with them. Some of the scenes had some minor audio bugs, but not enough to ruin the experience. There was a good amount of character interaction and content with your companions and advisors. The environments were entirely new and unique for the most part, and absolutely breathtaking to boot. There is little to no reward for defeating enemies in combat, especially if you reach the level cap of 27, which is pretty easy by this point, and you'll receive no further experience gain. One way this could have been combated would be to have certain enemies drop amulets of power to give characters more ability points. These extra ability points could be used on several passive abilities that add buffs to characters. Having a stat boost after defeating a certain number of enemies could have been another solution. Trespasser is bursting with lore that shakes the very foundation of the Dragon Age universe. However, to get the full experience, the DLC was a little too reliant on the Codex entries as a primary source of information, rather than for additional or supplementary lore. This DLC features the best crafting facilities in all of the Inquisition content and DLCs. The final boss was rather lackluster and needed more building up and context for such an important DLC. Along with references to past events and consequences for choices you've made, there are further choices and alternative paths to conclusions within Trespasser. The new armor wasn't really suited for many race, gender, and class combos. While the epilogue was a little too fast-paced and wasn't narrated, I felt the DLC as a whole was well written and ended wonderfully. The story arc is suspenseful, dramatic, full of excitement, and has a good amount of follower content. This is most definitely the best DLC BioWare has done for Inquisition, one of the best they've ever done, period, and one of the most memorable experiences in the entire Dragon Age series. I've played the DLC over and over, and still find it exceptional in almost every possible aspect. I'm overjoyed to give Dragon Age Inquisition Trespasser a standing ovation score of 9.5 out of 10. The DLC is definitely worth the price, and a great conclusion to Dragon Age Inquisition. Trespasser will likely remain one of the most memorable and loved moments in the Dragon Age series for years to come. If you haven't played Trespasser, are you considering it more now? What are you looking forward to most? If you have played the DLC, what did you think of it? What was your favorite part? Tell me down below in the comments. I'd love to chat with you about it. For more Dragon Age, Mass Effect Andromeda, and BioWare related videos, be sure to subscribe to my channel by clicking the big blinking subscribe button coming up shortly. For instant news coverage of BioWare games, be sure to follow me on Twitter or other forms of social media, links to which can be found down in the description.